Hello and welcome to West Virginia Press Insight. I'm Tom Hunter.
And I'm Betsy DeBoer.
West Virginia Press Insight focuses on policy and impact, not politics or personalities.
Today we're looking at the following issues: the Education Reform Act, eliminating the tax on Social Security benefits, legislation on foster care, progress on the promises of leadership, and all the bills, and more bills.
WVU Today takes a look at food deserts in the Mountain State. In our in-depth segment, Don Smith sits down with Angie Rosser of the West Virginia Rivers Coalition on legislation impacting the environment, trends in environmental legislation, and the efforts of the environment lobbyist.
And on tourism, we visit Pipestem Resort State Park to learn about all the planned improvements. For the second year in a row, discussion on West Virginia's education system has overwhelmed the Capitol and drowned out all other conversation. The State Senate has been meeting as a committee of the whole to discuss the Senate Bill 451, the Omnibus Education Bill, which would dramatically impact education in West Virginia.
With the situation changing daily, West Virginia Press Insight decided to host a roundtable discussion on the overall issues and actions. Betsy and I are joined here by Don Smith, Executive Director of the West Virginia Press Association, and Phil Kabler, the Charleston Gazette-Mail Senior Correspondent at the State Capitol. And Phil, just celebrating the beginning of your 34th year with the Gazette-Mail and working these beats. You've seen a lot of interesting things happen under the dome.
Only 30th sessions. So
yeah, but you've seen a lot.
Don't age me too much.
In those 3 decades, you've seen a lot of interesting things happen under the dome. This is a new twist on things, though, because of the fact that the Senate brought together this committee of the whole to take up this bill. I mean, talk about the historical significance of that and how that process worked.
Yeah, that's the first time I've seen it, and historically it's been used twice before, so I actually went and pulled some of the old Senate journals. In 2017, the governor wanted to address the Senate. He had a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget, which we still have in the Constitution today, and he wanted to explain it to the Senate. So today we would just have a resolution inviting the senator to speak, but or the governor to speak, but for some reason the Senate did it as committee of the whole. Then in 1961, they were passing the first personal income tax in state history. It was on Second Amendment stage, and they had a series of amendments with different exemptions from this new tax, and they wanted the ability to have tax officials on the floor to explain, say, what would this exemption do? One of the exemptions would have given you a $60 a year credit against college tuition, which back then would have probably covered most of it. So they were able to talk to the experts on the Senate floor and say, what will this do, which you couldn't normally do in a floor session. So once they did Second Amendment, they dissolved the committee of the whole. So this is the first time in state history, one, that a committee of the whole has met for more than one day, and also that it had worked an entire bill as the committee of the whole. So for better or worse, it's a historic precedent.
Well, Phil, you came over today straight from the Capitol, and we appreciate it. But my understanding is, then, with today's action, the committee of the whole is finished, correct?
Right.
So this bill is now. What happens now?
Yeah, they met briefly this morning, and we had all kind of anticipated a long, arduous session since the bill was at amendment stage in the committee. But the Senate Democrats decided, rather than fight two battles, they would just go ahead and let the bill go on without amendment, without discussion today. So it advanced in the committee of the whole 18-16, with 2 Republicans voting no, which means that in the full committee, if one more Republican would go against the bill, it would die on a 17-17 vote. So, and then the process pretty much returns to the routine. The full Senate met about an hour later, received the committee report just like any other committee report. They did go ahead and read it a first time today, so it'll be on amendment stage Friday in the Senate, which is when we expect all the fireworks. But the process from here on out returns to the normal legislative process.
Now, Phil, in this bill, there's actually a non-severability clause. Is that typical that we see in bills?
No, that's highly unusual. That most bills have what they call a severability clause, which says, particularly in bills that have a lot of sections and issues, and the severability clause says if somebody goes to court and overturns this one portion of the bill, the remainder of the bill remains in effect and stays as law. This is non-severability, so if any one portion is challenged in court and overturned, and there's obviously a lot of different facets that could be challenged. One is that comes to mind is the paycheck protection, where you would have to reapply every year to have your union dues taken out of your school paycheck. It's one that might very well be challenged, but with a non-severability clause, if somebody goes to court and overturns that, then the entire law is gone, including the pay raises and the some of the things that the teachers like about the bill, like being able to bank sick leave for health care when they retire. So it's kind of a poison pill that unless you take everything, you can lose the good aspects of the bill. So very unusual. In fact, there's a manual about how to draft bills, and it says something about non-severability clauses should be used rarely, if ever. So they've gone against their own guidelines, but I think there was a purpose behind doing that.
Now, Phil, coming into the session, we heard a commitment from Governor Justice to try to deliver on another 5% pay raise for educators. That was what was being eyed as the Senate looked to develop this legislation by the unions and by teachers who fought for and received a pay raise last year in the wake of the teacher walkout that occurred during the session in 2018. And as they come back and look at this legislation and look at that pay raise package develop, all of a sudden they see all these other things are built around the pay raise package, such as charter schools and educational service accounts, educational savings accounts, rather, and a lot of complaints among state educators and those within the state education community that it seemed there was a lot of out-of-state consultation with the Senate on the development of this comprehensive educational reform package, but not a lot of discussion even with the State Board of Education, State Department of Education. Elaborate on how that's developed.
Yeah, I think there was some testimony that both the representatives of the teachers' unions and the State Board of Education and various county boards that they had not only not had any input, but had not been approached to have any feedback on this legislation or to help draft it. And the two witnesses who testified to the Senate Education Committee were both out-of-state advocates for charter schools and private school operations. So, and I think as Senator Hardesty said on the Senate floor, I believe yesterday, that certain portions of the bill looked like they were taken verbatim from the ALEC website, which is a conservative, reduced size of government political action group. And so there's some question about who's kind of driving the bus here. Why are experts in education in the state and at the county level not being involved in this process? So I think there's a legitimate concerns that for every now and then you'll see a bill surface and say, who wants this and who authored this? Because it doesn't seem like something organic. It seems like it's something that was introduced from an outside interest group. So I think that's a legitimate argument. We'll see how it plays out as the bill progresses, and both on the Senate floor and when it gets over to presuming it gets over to the House of Delegates.
Well, Phil, and everybody, I guess, my understanding is on the non-serviceability clause is that applies in the Senate, but the House can break it up and do what they want to do with this bill, right?
They can,
So
they can it's like any other bill. You can make whatever amendments you can get passed. So if they want to remove the non-severability clause, they can do that. They can break out other components if they choose to, or they can just, and as Speaker Hanshaw kind of alluded to in a press release he put out yesterday, which didn't sound super keen about what the Senate's doing, and he had a statement saying that we intend to move forward with pay raises and benefits for teachers and service personnel, which almost sounds like, regardless of what the Senate sends us, we intend to pass a clean pay raise bill and a clean bill on PEIA benefits, which is completely in their prerogative. There's any number of bills that go from one house to the other with have much fanfare in one house and then never see the light of day in the other. So there's, other than the pressure that the Senate can put on the House to take up 451 in order for the Senate to act on House bills, other than the normal pressure between the two houses, there's no obligation for the House to even take up the bill if they don't feel compelled to do so.
I know that in my case, I have a daughter, Abby, who is at Marshall, working to be a teacher in elementary ed. That's been her lifelong goal. I've got a 14-year-old, Kate, in the school system. Betsy, you have Aiden. He's in 15-year-old. Tom, Hayden's still in school. So, I mean, this applies to everybody in the state. And there's a lot of interest in this. And I've sat down with the union officials, and I've sat down with leadership in the Senate. Everybody seems to really want to improve the education system, but there are really clear and hard divides on what they see as the right way to do that. It doesn't seem to be self-serving. It just seems to be a philosophical difference, but a very hard difference. Why, when we have interim meetings throughout the year, and we had this teacher situation last year, why do you think this wasn't addressed earlier in the year before this? Is that a political move?
That's a really good question, and it's the interim process, I think, has been criticized for quite some time. And the interim process, for those who aren't real familiar with the legislature, that the idea is that in the off season, since they are a citizen legislature, that they would meet 3 days a month and each year take up a series of topics to study for the 9 months when they're not in session, with the idea that you could have legislation ready to go when you come back in January. And over time, particularly under the new legislative leadership, there's been a scaling back of the interim process. You have much fewer meetings. They skipped a number of months for the last couple of years, so you're having much fewer meetings and not really time to address some of these issues. That there are interim committees that have to get reports from various agencies each month. So to the extent they've had time to meet, they've been doing these things they're obligated to do, as opposed to looking at big picture issues. So that's a good question. Why the interim process has been allowed to kind of denigrate over time, and two, knowing after the 2018 walkout that there were issues remaining with public education, why not set up an interim committee that could have looked at some of these philosophical issues and practical matters with education? So that's a really good question. Why there was no interim committee looking at this from the time they resolved the walkout last March until now.
From reading our coverage of all of our papers around the state and from following it at the Capitol, I don't know that that more meetings, the two sides would have ever came together. But I think it would have helped voters in the state and parents in the state understand this, because, like we said earlier, it's a real concern for everybody, what's going on with the schools and the teachers. And I do agree, everyone wants to improve education. I know I saw data that's out today that we shared our member newspapers that shows where West Virginia students are. And one of the criticisms from leadership is that students enter the system at about 36 and exit the system at 50. And that's one of their points. Now, on the other side, there's a lot of talk about, well, there's other problems in the system that add to that. But Tom, Betsy, as parents, do you want more information? What do you guys think in terms of the discussion out there and getting things out?
Well, I mean, it's clear, and you touched on this, Don, earlier in your comments. I mean, Steve Payne, the state superintendent of schools, has acknowledged in terms of the report card across all areas, there is some concern about underachievement right now. And I think state officials have been at the forefront acknowledging, yeah, we do have some work to do. I know on a parental basis, two of the things that concern us, particularly that have kids involved in activities, one is extracurricular activities has been a heart of discussion around elements of this bill that's been proposed in the Senate. And another, which I want to let Betsy talk more to because she has the accounting background to talk to it, is tax rates and levy rates and the flexibility that counties within this proposed legislation would now have to increase your property taxes. On the extracurricular thing, Phil, this is something we've heard about in other sessions around legislation that would allow homeschoolers to participate in a school that's in their local community, their local area, to participate on a sports team. And the SSAC, the Secondary Schools Activities Commission, has been adamantly opposed to this, as have others, and it hasn't gone anywhere. But within this bill, there's discussion on the charter school element. If charter schools were established, would a child attending a charter school, for instance, in the city of Wheeling, if they didn't have access to extracurricular activities through their charter school, would they be permitted to participate in the band or in the sports programs or in a show choir at Wheeling Park High School? And there's been a lot of discussion about that through the debate on this bill.
Yeah, it's amazing how any discussion with public education gets back to extracurriculars and sports and things like that, which I guess is human nature. But yeah, there was a discussion yesterday that on that scenario said, could a charter school student under this bill play sports for the local public school? And the answer was yes. And so the question was put, well, conversely, let's say you have a public school student and the local charter school happens to emphasize the arts and has a great show choir. Could the public school student in a school that has no show choir participate with the charter school? And they said no. So it's that kind of double standard seemed to rankle some of the senators during this bill explanation yesterday. So where that goes, like everything else, it's subject to change in the legislative process. But yeah, you never have a public school issue where the extracurriculars don't surface as a main sticking point at some point.
And then the setting of levy rates.
That would change, and there would still be required to be a vote on that. Is that correct? If
Well,
they
the school board would vote, but it would change the way, and I'm not certain where the thresholds are, but they would have the ability to raise levy rates without doing a public referendum like you have now, or a levy election. So I don't think most people have caught on to that yet. So I think that's going to be interesting when the general public begins to realize that one of the aspects of this bill is potential for your property taxes to go up, whether there'll be a hue and cry at that point. But yeah, that's one of the components.
And has the school board taken a position on the levy rates as far as if they support that, or if they support it with some sort of change, or do you know?
They may have taken a position. I'm just not aware of it, but I'm not certain that they've taken a stand on that particular.
The state board has.
Well, I know
issue.
there have been several statements prepared, but this legislation was moving so quickly, they had to hold the statements and wait, and they said, well, wait, we don't want to issue this because we don't know what's going on. But on the teacher side, and maybe the need for property tax increase, we think of education, we remember the famous No Child Left Behind. And one of the things I hear from the public is this is a leaving some kids behind type of bill, that we're going to take some of maybe the better or more affluent students are going to leave and go to a charter school, and that'll be less money for the public schools, and these kids who are still in the public schools will have to, and the teachers who are working in that system will struggle. That would seem that maybe it would increase the need for property tax increases to replace that money. But what are you hearing, or what's the testimony to Capitol in terms of the teachers and the parents saying, hey, we're going to be in the public schools, we're not leaving, and this would be horrific for our school system needs to improve, but this is the last thing we need.
Yeah, I think that's been an issue both for students and for teacher personnel, that the question of whether when a charter school comes to a community, does it siphon off the best, not only the best students, but the best teachers? And there's a considerable concern about that. And there's also been some talk that in other states that when charter schools are limited to a certain enrollment number, that there's a lottery system in order to be selected to enroll in a charter school, which really gets into issues of inequities. It's like your whole future depends on winning this lottery, basically, which is really kind of a harsh thing for a young child to have to go through.
Absolutely. Now, this is going to the House, where again Speaker Hanshaw has said that there are some elements they like, some they don't. It could be broken up.
Right.
And the governor has said, if I'm not mistaken, in his press conference, that at least in the form he saw the original bill, he would veto that bill. Is that?
Yeah, he gave the strong indication, and I think he said he called the bill created a dog's mess where no mess was needed. So
He does have a way with words.
I think he was, in no uncertain terms, expressed his unhappiness with the bill in its current form, and of course reiterated his commitment to a pay raise and improving PEIA coverage. So it's almost as if you've got all these elements amassing to oppose the bill, and you've got the Senate leadership kind of on this other island fighting to the end to get it passed. So
And that seems to be the thing that everybody was talking about a year ago at this time, Phil, was PEIA.
right.
And we had the task force, we had the meetings in between sessions, and here we are, and PEI is still very much in the crux of where a lot of these issues revolve around, but seems to have faded into the background of the conversation
kind of
around all the other elements of this legislation that's been proposed in the Senate.
Right, yeah, it's kind of been lost in this whole debate over the omnibus bill, and the governor's pledged to set aside $150 million in a reserve fund to fund future increases, and the estimates are that healthcare costs in PEIA will grow at about $50 million a year exponentially, so that 150 theoretically, and the current year the funding's good, so 150 theoretically gets you 2 more years out, but then there's really been no discussion this session about how to fix some of the fundamental issues with PEIA. And the task force, just before the session started, made some recommendations, and now that you mention it, gave the indication that they would be meeting again in January, and of course January's over and they haven't met since. So yeah, it's kind of the forgotten element of this whole debate.
Now, one question, at least in my district, and that everyone's curious about, is if you think there's going to be a strike again this year, if teachers are going to walk out. Is there any talk at the Capitol about that, or what they'll do if so?
Yeah, and I think last year it seemed to be a grassroots up movement. At first you had the various counties taking strike votes, or actually walkout votes. Technically wasn't a strike. So I think you've had some counties already meet, and I don't know if any of them have voted to support a walkout, but have.
Mingo County has voted to
Oh,
support
have
a
they?
one-day, yeah.
Okay,
They've taken
So
action.
I think as it develops, I think it'll be a grassroots up, not a top-down movement. So yeah, I think it will progress very much like last year if it comes to that. So it'll be something to watch for.
Phil, as we close, a couple things that are clearly procedural, and I'll use the term political. We went to the committee of the whole. We went the non-serviceability clause. The early timing of this, the Senate getting it to the House, allows time that even if the governor would veto, the Republicans have a number to override a veto. Is there talk? Is that clearly intentional that that's the plan? If they need to, they could go that route. Is that what seems to be what's happening?
I think it's clearly one reason why they took it up so early. It's one of the, I think one of the flaws of the state governmental process, that a veto can be overridden with a simple majority. So the majority you use to pass a bill, you can use to override a veto, where most states have a 2/3 majority to override. So I think that was part of it. I think the second part, to say, was to have enough time to have House bills in the Senate's possession and say, look, if we're not going to work these bills until we see progress on our omnibus education bill. So I think there's at least two motives for getting this bill through the Senate early. One, to override a veto, and two, to put more pressure on the House to to support at least some semblance of a version of this bill.
Did we, in closing, did West Virginia at one time have a 2/3 veto override and change that?
You know, I wish I knew that. I think it's been simple majority, but I don't know for quite some time, but I don't know if it ever changed from 2/3 or why it's in there. That's probably something I should run into legislative information and pull out some old journals and try to figure out how that came to be.
We'll look for that in the Sunday column.
Yeah, well,
Appreciate it.
First free moment, I'll research that.
That may be 60 days. Clearly, this is a complicated issue that's not over. It's moving to the House now, and there'll be a lot more discussion. Actually, it's going to the Senate floor for a lot of discussion this week and next, and then if it moves to the House, and then clearly the governor has to weigh in. So we'll be following it. We thank Phil for joining us here. Tom, Betsy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
House Bill 2010 is headed to the Senate, but discussion in the House wasn't all supportive. The bill, which would move West Virginia's foster children into managed care, passed in amended form through the House Health Committee and the House Judiciary.
But as Lori Kersey of the Charleston Gazette-Mail reported, at a public hearing on House Bill 2010, child welfare advocates and others expressed mostly opposition to the bill. Now, the bill overhauls the way West Virginia's foster children get health care services. Under the proposal, the Department of Health and Human Resources would contract with a managed care organization.
That organization would oversee medical, pharmaceutical, dental, and behavioral health services provided to foster care children. The organization would also oversee children receiving adoption assistance, those formerly in foster care, and those at risk of entering foster care.
Betsy, anytime the issue of foster care comes up, particularly around the legislative session, it's always a very emotionally charged issue because we're talking about children and families here in the Mountain State, and a lot of opposition again to this bill in the House, and that's expected to continue once that legislation moves over to the Senate for further consideration.
You're right, Tom. And Stephen Smith, the former director of the West Virginia Healthy Kids and Families Coalition, he's actually a foster parent to a 5-year-old boy. And he right now is opposed to this bill. He says that he wants to see less bureaucracy, not more, that his child needs more care and not less.
The Department of Health and Human Resources Deputy Secretary Jeremiah Samples has said this bill will help correct issues in the system. It's certainly an issue we're going to continue to keep an eye on here on West Virginia Press Insight. As the 2019 West Virginia legislative session continues, West Virginia Press Insight is monitoring bills related to the leadership's goals. You can see some of the goals outlined by Governor Jim Justice, Senate President Mitch Carmichael, and House Speaker Roger Hanshaw.
The major commitments include no new taxes, significant tax cuts, pay raises for all state employees, $150 million for PEIA, $14 million for tourism, and elimination of the Social Security tax.
Elimination of the business equipment and inventory tax, promoting broadband expansion and investment, expanding access to community college, technical schools, and workforce training opportunities, and approving the Second Chance for Employment Act.
We have seen bills move on several issues. Taylor Stuck reported in the Herald-Dispatch that the House Finance Committee passed House Bill 2001 to exempt all Social Security income from the state's income tax. West Virginia is one of only 13 states that tax Social Security income.
And Jake Zuckerman reported in the Charleston Gazette-Mail the legislature is moving forward on a series of bills designed to keep ex-convicts out of jails and not reel more in. Senate Bill 152 expands expungement of criminal convictions. Senate Bill 62 allows dismissal of charges after completing a drug court program. House Bill 2190 allows nonviolent offenders to be released on their own recognizance. And House Bill 2083 makes it easier for released inmates to get temporary identification.
Ryan Quinn of the Charleston Gazette-Mail reports the Senate unanimously passed Senate Bill 1, providing students free tuition at in-state public community colleges. This is the second year the Senate unanimously passed the bill. The big question is whether the House of Delegates will follow suit. The House never took up legislation during last year's regular session.
Delegate Isaac Spinagle, Democrat of Pendleton County, said that taxing Social Security is unfair, noting that you pay Social Security when you're working and then the state of West Virginia and the federal government tax it when you start receiving it. Spinagle calls this double taxation.
And Delegate Larry Rowe, a Democrat from Kanawha County, said the state exempts Social Security. It must remember senior centers and senior support programs that still need more funding. Rowe also said the neediest are already exempt from taxes, and they still have needs for funds to assist them in the programs that they need.
Looking ahead, there is support in the House this year for free tuition at in-state and public community colleges, including support from the leadership and Speaker Roger Hanshaw.
And on the second chance bills, Chairman John Schott said there are people in the correctional system who have broken the law, but they are not a danger to society.
Hi, I'm Don Smith, and today on In Depth we talk with Angie Rosser, Executive Director of the West Virginia Rivers Coalition. We're going to talk about legislation impacting the environment, trends in environmental legislation over the last few years, and the efforts of the lobbyists who work in the environmental industry. Angie, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me on, Don. The environment issues sometimes get marginalized, so it means a lot that we have a chance to bring to your viewers what's happening.
Well, I appreciate it. This administration in the last couple of years, and maybe before that, the big topic has been jobs, jobs, jobs.
Right.
I mean, literally that's a theme from some of the speeches. I think there's been sort of you say minimalized, but maybe that we're willing to sacrifice some things to get jobs, and it's your job to make sure that doesn't happen, or try to minimize the impact on the environment to create those jobs. Let's talk a little bit first about this session. What are the key pieces of legislation that the Rivers Coalition is watching right now?
Well, our number one piece we're watching is Senate Bill 167, and this is actually a DEP, Department of Environmental Protection rule governing water quality standards. And water quality standards are very important to us because they limit the amount of pollution, the amount of toxins, cancer-causing chemicals that end up in our drinking water supplies, end up in our rivers and streams in a way that could be dangerous if we come into contact with them, or can affect aquatic life as well. So every 3 years, our state takes a look at these and sees if there are any updates that need to be made. And this year was the year for that process, and DEP came out with a rule recommending 60 updates to what's called our human health criteria. Again, human health criteria keeps limits and controls on pollutants that are most harmful to human health.
Okay. Now, this year's updates, would that make West Virginia's rules as maybe I want to say stringent, but maybe as protective as ever? Are you happy with where we are?
The updates are a mixed bag. Some are becoming more stringent, some are less. But let me back up and let you know how we got to this place. Our standards for these human health criteria were largely put in place in the 1980s and haven't been updated in a long while. In 2015, a few years ago, the U.S. EPA came out with recommended updates for 94 human health criteria. DEP took a long, hard look at this, went through an extensive public comment process, and says, we have reason to believe that this is the best science available, and we should update 60 of those in our state standards. So what the DEP has recommended and what we're supporting is to get up to speed, catch up with the science. Let's not keep living in 1985. Let's catch up, make science-based decisions when it comes to setting these standards that protect human health.
Okay. Now, not just in West Virginia, but in West Virginia and certainly nationally, we're hearing talk of rolling back some of the environmental protections and to make it easier for industry to operate. Is that something that you see, and pardon the pun, but flowing from the federal level down to the state level? Is there influence there you have to watch, and is that something you worry about?
It is something I worry about, and certainly our members and citizens I talk to around the state are worried about, that they're sensing this attitude of less regulation is going to be better in terms of attracting jobs. And we're seeing that mirrored on the federal level. Attacks on core environmental laws like the Clean Water Act are being redefined in ways that would fundamentally change their role here in West Virginia and nationally. So the combination of things like this administration in West Virginia coming out with a regulatory moratorium, this legislature talking about making sure that our regulations are not any more stringent than what is federally required, causes some concern that we don't want to just do this thoughtlessly. And the idea of regulation being kind of a bad word in West Virginia, that we need less regulation to attract jobs, I say let's be careful, because regulations are there to protect us. They're protections for the people who live here. So every time we're looking at regulation, we need to ask questions about, what about public health? What about the environment? What about long-term consequences to the environment and how those can affect us years down the road? So there's a lot of gravity to the decisions that are being made, and I just hope that we're not making them too hastily in this rush to try to recover our economy, which, as you said, we need a transformation in West Virginia when it comes to job growth. So I see a lot of validity into thinking creatively and boldly how to attract jobs to this region, but putting our eggs in the same basket we always have with extractive industries, the boom and bust cycle that we've seen in this state, are the same risks. And again, the environmental legacies that are left behind, someone's going to have to pay for that, for cleaning those up.
True. Angie, I see every year I cover the legislature, and there are major acts or bills that talk about this industry or that industry, and teams of lobbyists pushing those through. I haven't seen as many, and I'm being, I guess, a little facetious here, as many people stepping forward saying, we need a big environmental bill,
Right.
and you don't have a team of people backing you.
No.
Tell us a little bit about what your session's like. How much help do you have, and what do you face?
Well, right. We're definitely feeling like the underdog at the Capitol. But, there are also times when I'm reminded how important the issues we work on are to the everyday West Virginian. And when we see these $10, $25 checks come in to support our work at the legislature, that means a lot, because we are funded by the grassroots. We are a nonprofit membership-based organization. We can only do this advocacy with the support of individual donors. So that's why we exist, which is meaningful to me. We're a staff of 4 people. I'm the registered lobbyist for the organization. I also do everything else to run an organization, as you know what that's like. So it is daunting when we try to pull together resources from the grassroots to support our work and see these corporately funded lobby teams that are able to throw dinners for legislators or receptions. I mean, we can't afford to do any of that. We concentrate all our resources into fact-finding, doing the research and the analysis of these policies, so hopefully we can inform decision makers and inform the public of the decisions that are at stake that affect their everyday lives.
Well, Angie, we're going to give people a chance to learn more about your organization and join as a member and to donate if they want to donate. We're going to provide that information. But also, one of the things I see at the session every year, and having worked in corporate America, is that if you come in, sometimes corporations come in and they want a certain thing this year, but they don't tend to go away. They come back the next year and they want more, and it's a continuing thing, and that's their role and their job, what they see their situation to be. But that has to be difficult for you when you're the sole lobbyist and you're facing a new challenge from a new direction from a new group every year. Does it get disheartening at times, or are there other lobbyists for other groups that team with you that you can work together with?
We do have a team with the West Virginia Environmental Council, where different environmental groups in West Virginia pool together resources to fund that team. But still, we feel very outnumbered and very on the defensive, I think, is the way to characterize these past few years. Because you're right, it just seems like every year there's more of a chipping away of environmental protections. And so for us, these recent years has been about trying to hold the line and reminding folks that these protections are in place for a reason, and if we start going down this slippery slope of deregulation or removing those without taking the time to look at the science to understand these sometimes highly technical policies, that we're putting our population at risk.
Well, I know that the newspaper industry does, and one of its roles is to put out public notice and legal advertising of public hearings and rules and invite people to come and see those. And I know we're working harder to make sure that people are more aware. But from your end, how important is it for people to follow that stuff and speak it when there's public hearings and come out to and file comments during comment periods? Is that something that West Virginians need to pay attention to and do?
Absolutely, and it's difficult because as you channel those notices, the volume is immense. I mean, there are permit applications being submitted every day across the state. But what we're seeing are communities coming together in ways I haven't seen in a while around certain proposed facilities that they have concerns about, or these pipelines, as you know, have been highly controversial because the phenomenon has been that there are places in this state that are being affected by the natural gas infrastructure that haven't been before because these pipelines are long, right? We're not just in the gas fields, but we're stretching across different regions of the state. So I think that's awakened more people living around West Virginia who see or who want to find a way to have input in decision making. And the role of our organization is to help inform them in those processes and where are the points of opportunity to provide those input. And the legal advertisements are so important, especially in places that don't have the broadband access, and some of those communities who are really getting the brunt of accelerated development, that they are aware of proposed projects or decisions that are being made that affect their property, affect their water supplies, affect their air quality.
Well, Angie, it's very important that they do stay in touch. I want to say that for those of you that want to get more involved, we thank Angie for being here, and we're going to provide you with the information to stay more informed. One of our sessions today was on covering bills, and that helps. But we're going to provide you information on membership and funding, and if you want to get involved, you can. And I can tell you, I apologize to Angie, you heard my phone go off. If you're a small nonprofit lobbyist, you have a lot of things to do. So on a normal day, I'd be picking my daughter up right now. You have to make time for that because you're a one-person team. And I'm sure that with your operation, there are times you're supposed to be several different places. And while people might not be able to come in and help you at the Capitol, they can help you through membership and donations. Is that correct?
That's right. That is such a meaningful way to support our work. $10 will get you a membership with our organization, and it goes a long way to being able to do what we do. You're right, we have to constantly prioritize what's coming at us. And we rely on our donors as well as volunteers and citizen lobbyists who will come to the Capitol, who will meet with their representatives. It goes a long way to letting those lawmakers know that people in their home communities are watching and are concerned about these issues.
All right, well, Angie, thank you. And if you want to get more involved at the legislature, we welcome you. Thank you.
Please. Thanks, Don.
Hi, I'm Erica Young. Many West Virginians in rural areas live in food deserts, where it's not easy to get to a supermarket or other reliable fresh food source. A group of WVU students is addressing that concern in the state. In this WVU Today segment, Associate Professor John Saldana explains the project.
A group of WVU students is addressing the growing problem of food deserts. It's all part of John Saldana's supply chain class here at the John Chambers College of Business and Economics at WVU. John, thanks for being with us. Let's start by explaining what is a food desert.
So a food desert is an area where you don't have access to good, nutritious food. So there are many definitions out there. The definition I like to go to is if somebody has to travel more than a mile to get to fresh food, and they don't have the means to do so, then that area would be defined as a food desert.
This project really was a partnership with Grow Ohio Valley in the Wheeling area. Talk a little bit about that partnership and what students did as part of this project.
We started up basically looking at all of the different areas of their supply chain, how to manage the demand, how to manage their production processes, how to manage their inventory, how to manage their warehousing, cold storage, both for the public market that they're going to start in May 2019, as well as for GOV's own operation, which is to grow fresh produce in Wheeling in 3 urban farms and greenhouses, as well as to supply local restaurants, local institutions, schools.
So what's next for this project? What's the timeline on the next steps?
What we're hoping to do is to have a continuous partnership where our students can go in and actually come up with programs that help them grow their business, and maybe even take this model to other parts of this state and the region, where we can see how we can have an impact on maybe reducing the gap in the people who are food insecure in other parts of the region.
If you'd like to learn more about this program or anything else happening on our campus, just visit our website. It's wvutoday.wvu.edu.
In the first 22 days of the 2019 West Virginia session, 1,257 bills were introduced, 484 bills in the Senate, and 773 bills in the House of Delegates.
Among the most recent bills introduced are House Bill 2724, a small business tax credit that would cover 50% of branding, marketing, and advertising costs for agricultural and manufactured products for 5 years. House Bill 2723 places penalty points on a driver's license for the use of electronic communication devices while operating a motor vehicle. House Bill 2726 would entitle natural resource producers to the Economic Opportunity Tax Credit. Overall, there are 45 bills from the governor, 16 bills on economic development, 61 bills on health, 126 bills on taxation, 49 bills on natural resources, and 10 bills on the environment and environmental protection.
Remember, you can get information on bills and track their progress. Visit the wvlegislature.gov website and look for bill status. You can search bills by topic, sponsor, subject, and several other methods. You can also set up your own bill tracking plan to follow legislation important to you. If the recent winter freeze has you planning your summer vacation, consider Pipestem Resort State Park. Greg Jordan of the Bluefield Daily Telegraph reports on the $11 million in renovations set for Pipestem. Governor Jim Justice announced the improvements. The West Virginia State Park System and Ace Adventure Resort have partnered to provide these high adventure activities at the park. Plans include a zip-line course over the Bluestone Gorge, more than $3 million in lodge upgrades, a splash park, tram renovations, a $1.3 million replacement for the park's water and wastewater treatment plant, cabin upgrades, and campground utility upgrades. Now let's take a look at Pipestem.